Welcome to the sideboard here at the first Orlando Standard Open for the weekend. I'm Glenn Jones, and I'm here with Forrest Mead.
Hello.
Orlando native, and my former roommate, actually.
Yep.
Former. Yeah. So now we have your Jund list laid out here, which is a little different from what we might call conventional Jund mid-range.
It's a little different, that's true.
The big changes, you've gone to a pseudo graveyard-oriented strategy. You've added Grizzly Salvage for a pseudo Impulse, and you've also got main deck Deathrite Shamans to give you a leg up against all those Reanimator decks. There are many out there, and a few other changes. So let's start with those. What made you want to play Deathrite Shaman in Jund, and where'd you go from there?
It seemed like the field was filled with only Reanimator decks and the Naya aggro decks, so Jund seemed like a decent place to be if you could play Deathrite Shaman in the deck. A deck with tons of spot removal and the ability to control hands and the creatures on the board with several board sweepers was a place I wanted to be. However, just putting Deathrite Shaman in your Jund deck is not as good as you want it to be. So that's what led us to toy around with a few more things and try the Grizzly Salvage here.
Now, I know at one point you were trying Faithless Looting and Gristlebrand and a little heavier on the Unburial Rights.
Yep.
Not where you actually wanted to be once you got to the tournament.
It didn't end up being what we wanted it to be. I still think there's a time and a place for putting the 7/7 lifelinking demon in play.
Legacy, perhaps.
Unfortunately, this is not the time or the place.
Okay, so in addition to running these cards, you decide to splash for the flashback on Unburial Rights.
Correct.
And some sideboard options we'll get to later. You have Deathrite Shaman, obviously, for the white. Farseek can go get you the lands.
Yep.
Have you had to struggle to find white, or has it mostly been easy to get to?
Finding white's been pretty easy. You end up Farseeking for essentially whatever color you need an extra of, red, black, or green. And with the Grizzly Salvage main deck, it's pretty easy to get to white as well. The Grizzly Salvages have been pretty good game one. You end up boarding them out a lot after game one, and you end up taking a much more heavy control role as opposed to being able to play all three roles, aggro, mid-range, or control game one, based on where you're at.
One of the big sacrifices you have to make with this particular mana base is Garruk Primal Hunter, which is like normally a bit of a mid-range trump, not really an option.
He's difficult. Certainly when you're casting your Farseek to make sure you can get white for your, Unburial Rights, and you have to find a Sacred Foundry where normally you've been finding a Stomping Ground or something.
Right.
Yep.
So, I mean, you get a bit of a trade-off, though, because you are effectively playing 7 Olivia Boldarans.
Correct.
Which is a lot more than most Jund decks play, what with, legal limits on
casting an Olivia Boldaran on turn 3, either by Deathrite Shaman and Grizzly Salvage or Farseek, pretty difficult to beat for a lot of decks game 1, particularly when they might expend a number of resources to kill it, and then you just play on Burial Rights, and you're back to where you were before, and they're not in a good spot.
Sure. There are a number of removal spell choices you've made in this deck that are pretty interesting. I like the Sever the Bloodline. I think it's a great card right now. You've also got one of Mizium Mortars that's not so unconventional.
Sure.
Some people like it as the 4th Bonfire that can also be an Abrupt Decay or whatever. But the real one, you went with Victim of Nights and Pillar Flames over Tragic Slips and Ultimate Prices, the normal place for that slot.
I wanted Pillar. I think Pillar is better against a number of decks. I like it because it's possible that you can still kill a Champion of Perish easily when it's a 2/2, which Tragic Slip, if you don't have it, obviously you can't do that. It also tends to be a little better against the non-aggro matchup since it just deals 2 damage, which sometimes is enough to win the game. It wasn't enough to win the game earlier when I played against a more controlling deck. And Victim of the Night I think is great. I think as Aurelia, the War Leader, gains in popularity with the blue, white, red decks, the ability for them to play that and think they're going to kill you, and instead you Victim of the Night it is a big deal. Deal. Also, if you're playing against the Reanimator matchup, sometimes you can let them, Ultimate Price is the same thing, you can let them resolve their Angel's Trinity, target 3 things in their graveyard, and then Victim it, and they lose those things permanently, making their deck substantially worse.
Yeah, I definitely agree there's a lot of overlap. I think that it's really nice for the mana to pair Victim of Night with Pillar as well, as opposed to trying to Victim and Tragic Slip, because then, we're talking Phylactery Lich levels of mana available, which can be tricky.
Particularly in this mana base, which is already a little trickier than most Jund decks.
Right, so I like that conservative take. And you also went down to 1 Wolf Run to make sure that worked out. People have played between 1 and 3 in the deck. And
with Salvage, it's easier to play 1 Wolf Run, because if you do need it, you can find it.
Accurate, which also would open up the possibility of maybe boarding Cavern of Souls, if that's something you're interested in. So, speaking of the sideboard, let's move on to that. It's mostly a conventional Jund sideboard. We've got, some random removal spells to fill out the gaps in the main deck. Some hand disruption for the people who don't have creatures for us to kill. And then we've got some Assemble the Legions.
Correct.
Talk to us about Assemble the Legions. How'd you get that one in there?
I was looking at my sideboard before the tournament started, and I had, probably 40 cards laid out I was considering.
Sure.
Most of them probably were never making the cut, but I don't like to axe anything until I've thoroughly thought about it.
Yeah.
And I had 2 Garruk Primal Hunters, and the mana seemed really tough. I know typically it's a card you want to board, And Brad Nelson, of all people, wandered over and said, "Let me see what you're playing." And he said, "So you're playing white?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Why don't you just board a Symbol of the Legion? It's a much higher impact card. It's a lot harder for people to see playing. It's probably even easier for you to cast, even though it's on your splash color. And if you play in a Symbol of the Legion and you're playing a control matchup, or you're playing the control in the matchup, they're not going to beat it very easily."
Yeah.
It's also been uniquely interesting that after game 1 in the Jund matchup, I become a Jund deck, they become a Jund deck, except one of us has a Symbol of the Legion.
Yeah, it seems really incredible in the Jund matchup specifically, where they're not going to even be bringing in a card that can answer.
Nope.
Some Jund decks are now aware that they're vulnerable to a Symbol of the Legion and that people play it, but they're not going to expect it out of the mirror, generally speaking. Even if they see the white, it's pretty hard to make that logical leap at this juncture. Obviously, like a week from now, 2 weeks from now, maybe 4-color Jund's just where people are, and a Symbol of the Legion's like really common.
Sure.
But I really like the choice for this week, and I think Brad was spot on there.
It's been pretty easy to win game 1-2 in that matchup with Unburial Rites in the main deck, and having 3 Olivias compared to a lot of us only playing 2, and the ability to consistently cast it more often on turn 3 than they are. It's been pretty good. And game 1s have been pretty easy to win in those matchups in the games I played. And obviously I have to board when I get to board into the same things they're doing with the Symbol. It's been a good place to be.
Sure, you just go over the top.
Yep.
Well, thanks for joining us, Forrest. I'm going to go ahead and let you get back to the tournament.
Appreciate it, man.